Shalom and Yeshua bless you. So again, I want to share with you that which Yahweh was speaking to me today, and I believe it's going to bless a lot of Yah's children. Yah told me today that He wants His children to come into His presence more often and to spend their time there. Remember, we're not of the world. We don't walk the way of the world. We're of heaven. We're just passing through. So in order for us to remember this, He wants us to spend our time with Him. And I'm going to share with you why that's important. But I want to share this first, how He wants us to come into His presence. You can read in Psalm 95:7, where Yah speaks about coming into His presence with thanksgiving and singing songs. With praise and with thanksgiving, that's the way we are to approach God. And He says this to us because this is His will, but also to understand that when you're coming into His presence, it's not just the presence of your Father, it's the presence of a king. Just like in the days of Esther, when even though that was her husband, she had to fast 3 days just to come into His presence and then touch His scepter. So you understand it from a kingdom perspective. He wants you to come into His presence with praise and thanksgiving, because this is the service of priests before God, and also this is what God expects His children to do. Now, why it's important to come into His presence? Again, number one is we're in this world, and this is where the evil one, Satan, this is where his operations are. Sin is here, iniquity is in this world, and when you're in His presence, it is like a safe place that you can be. Yah had told me this, that He has children that are seeking. They have a lot of questions on their heart about the things in their lives, why things are happening, what is happening. They seek wisdom, they seek knowledge, they seek all these things. But Yah told me that there is a caution. It's important to come into His presence first and then seek. And I'll explain it like this. If we are in a place of depression, or if we sinned in some way, I'm going to share it from like this, because as a minister, I've heard this over the years. Someone sinned. They fell into pornography. And they have questions. God, how did this happen? How can I be set free? Even then, you can go into God's presence and then seek. But if you're in a place of depression and condemnation, and then you try to ask God questions and seek, Satan will be there to answer them. It's like a pitfall, seeking knowledge and seeking anything outside of being inside of His presence. And it says in the Word that in His presence is joy forevermore. In His presence is hope. In His presence is life. And when you're in a place of joy and hope and life, then seeking becomes a joy. It becomes something that the answers won't lead you into further condemnation. The devil will come with truth, but it's actually to lead you into condemnation. How did you fall? Because you're a wicked person. Because you are a sinner. Because you are adulterous. You're wicked. You know, the devil will come to condemn you with these things if you're actually not in that safe place. So God wants you to be in that safe place where there is joy, when there is hope. And it's not that God's not going to convict you regarding sin. He may even rebuke you regarding sin. But He also leaves you the hope that there is restoration for you. So that's something that Yah had told me. There's a lot of His children that ask questions, but they're actually questions that derive out of pain, questions that derive out of a place of depression. And again, whatever it is, place of depression, sadness, and it's actually it's leading them into further pits of depression, further pits of grief, and further pits of sin. It's like when Yahweh asks us a question, it's not that He needs an answer. It's the same when you go into Yahweh's presence. When you ask a question, you realize you already have the answer. And many times our questions and our seekings that derive out of pain really aren't the questions that we want to ask. many times the questions that we want to ask is, where can I find peace? That's usually the question. And that's why when you come into his presence, your questions become few or none. When he gives you the peace and he gives you the joy and he causes you to rest. And then you realize, what else do I have to ask? What other troubles do I need to think about if I'm at peace and I'm at rest? So many times for the children of God, the question that God knows is on their heart is, where can I find peace? And again, it's not that you can't ask him, but practice coming before his presence. So that means praise and thanksgiving with a repentant heart, and then let Yahweh take you from there. So I want to share that to start off with. The other thing that I want to share is this. He told me is, even among Christians, there is this understanding, twisted understanding, or a lack of understanding about what it means to come into God's presence. People, they wait for a feeling many times. I feel the presence of God. And actually, they not having a sense that God is a person, but embracing this idea that I want to feel the presence of God. And truly, that's when it comes down to feelings. We want to feel him, but many times we don't want to know him. And we don't know him or want to know him because we don't believe that he is. And that's why the word says in Hebrews 11:6, anyone who comes to him, comes into his presence, must believe that he is. Meaning, everything that he said about who he is and what he is, a person, an Elohim that is watching you, that is there, that cares, that you can talk to, that you can know, that created you in his image. When you believe those things and then come into his presence, then a lot more things begin to open up to you. When you're saying, I want to feel the presence of God, you're actually like symbolizing or making it some kind of figure of speech when we speak in that way, symbolic. And it's not God's will, because that actually leads us to constantly looking for a feeling to know that God is there, rather than actually believing that he is and you can get to know him. So those are things that that Yah had told me that he wants me to share with you. Very short this time, but he wants us to come into his presence and he wants us to dwell there. Now, I'll share this also. He told me about in his presence, to remain in his presence. Again, if you remain in a place of thanksgiving and praise, you make that a part of your life, you can begin to remain there. Another thing that he had told me is, anywhere where you're comfortable is where you're wanting to be and wanting to stay. If you're comfortable in your bed, people want to stay in bed. If you're comfortable in an environment, people like being in that environment. And so God also wants you to know that to be comfortable before him. And he told me this, like, to know that when you're in his presence, yes, he is a king. You come before a king, but again, he is also a father that wants to hold and embrace his children. He wants you to experience the comfort of God. And you can, and he said, whatsoever things are good, think on these things. So when you come to his presence, think on things that are good. The Father embracing me, is holding me in his arms right now. He is looking into my eyes. He is whispering in my ear. When you visualize those things, it actually causes you to want to remain there. And the more that you remain there, God actually, he prepares a place for you. And I'll say this, for example, Elisha, when you read in the scriptures about Elisha, that was a servant of Elijah. He would pass back and forth at times, past a woman's house, a woman and her husband, and he would stop in. And they would welcome him and feed him and take care of him, and then he would go on his way. Now they realized that he passed often, and that he would often stay and then leave. So what they did was to prepare a place for him so that he could lodge there. And that is something that we have to realize. The more that we dwell in the presence of God, God will actually prepare like a place for us to remain. He'll give us provisions to remain there. He will create an environment for us that we can dwell there and remain there. He will send people to us to help us to remain there. He will do whatever he has to do in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits so that we remain there. He will do that for us if we're diligently wanting to remain and come into his presence. The more that we love being in the world and working the works of the flesh, or becoming distracted with the things of the world, is actually when we remaining in God's presence isn't comfortable anymore, and we become less and less going into his presence, which means less praise and less thanksgiving, and then the weight of the world begins to weigh us down. In his presence is a fullness of joy. All right, and this is what I wanted to share with you. I hope that you understood how important it is to come into his presence daily, especially in the early morning, and then remaining in it throughout the day. Remain in praise and thanksgiving, the grateful heart. Know that God loves you, so that you know that you're comfortable with him. Come before him also with fear, knowing that he is a king, the fear of God, not the spirit of fear. And Yahweh will do the rest. He will make every provision for you so that you can remain there always. And this is what I wanted to share with you. Thanks for listening. Shalom.